Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our very first public board meeting via Zoom with also a YouTube feed. By way of introduction for those that are watching by YouTube, my name is Dan Wilson. I'm the board chair. I'm joined this afternoon by my fellow board members. It appears all board members are here. We're also joined by the President and CEO, David Mouche, our Chief of Staff, Dr. Wasim Saad, our Chief Operating Officer, Karen McCullough, our Associate Dean from the Windsor campus of the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, Dr. Larry Jacobs, and members of the Windsor Regional Hospital senior team. So only board members are allowed to vote. All other participants may not. If board members would like to speak, please use the hand icon and I will do my best to see that and acknowledge that, and then you can either vote or make a comment or ask a question. With that, let's get started. I will call the meeting to order, and everyone has had an opportunity to see the package and go through the agenda. You're familiar with the material, therefore I need to ask, is there anyone that has a conflict of interest that needs to be declared on the basis of the agenda or the material presented? Seeing none, we will move on. The next item on the agenda is the approval of our minutes from the March 5th public meeting, and I see a motion to accept those minutes. Anthony, is there someone that will second that? Okay, Paul LaChance. All right, are there any comments, questions, or revisions from the board members? Seeing none, all those in favor? Is anyone opposed? That motion is carried. With that, we will now move to a report of President and CEO David Mouche, and partway through that presentation, he will turn it over to Dr. Wasim Saad for the Chief of Staff report out. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to pull up a presentation. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to our first board meeting by way of Zoom. And probably as we proceed through these unprecedented times, it most likely will not be our last meeting in this format. So tonight, myself and Dr. Saad will be doing a presentation which is going to outline a little bit of history for those who are watching on YouTube on how we got to the place we're at. Going to talk about our current financial results for the year ending March 31st, 2020. We're going to talk about our immediate future, where Dr. Saad is going to highlight issues with respect to what is happening with respect to the professional staff, what our immediate plans are, and then also he's going to highlight some issues we're working on right now as a hospital. And then we're going to end with talking a little bit about the current present situation with respect to COVID that is facing our world. So just to start, back in October 1st of 2013, and we're closing in on close to 7 years, we had a major transformation, and it's been called by many in the province to be one of the most complex hospital healthcare transformations in Ontario in the last 15 years. It involved the realignment of hospital healthcare services between ourselves and Hotel Dieu Grace, now Healthcare, where Windsor Regional became responsible for all acute care services in Windsor, and Hotel Dieu became responsible for subacute care services. Even though we were planning for a possible pandemic based upon the history going back to SARS and the various MERS H1N1, et cetera, that we work through as a community, as a society, clearly a pandemic wasn't the driving force behind the realignment. The driving force was moving towards a new hospital healthcare system for Windsor, Essex. But I can tell you what we've learned during this pandemic, the reason for the realignment can be justified, or the fact we were realigned can be justified just on how the system has reacted and dealt with the pandemic. It can be justified on its own. So the long and winding road is heading into realignment. Our financial situation, if we focused on that, was very strong. Windsor Regional had 4 fiscal years prior to realignment accumulated quite a surplus, had a very healthy working capital. Unfortunately, pretty much at the start of realignment and for the last 5 years, we've struggled financially, and have accumulated, had resulted in a poor working capital situation, which I'll talk about a little bit further. But we've been dealing with that ever since. So what changed is the OLEC campus that we took responsibility for had just come off supervision, ministry directed supervision, several months before. And there was definitely structural problems, not only at the OLEC campus, but also there are structural issues at the Met campus, but not as severe as what was at the OLEC campus due to age and due to the years since major renovations in any spot. What complicated the matter even further was issues that the funding formula in the year we made the transformation changed. So the analogy we give, it's like changing your tire going 100 kilometers an hour down the 401. It's not the best time to make a change, but we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And we tried to work with the ministry to be taken out of the funding formula for a couple of years. But we were told to stay into it and let it shake out. And unfortunately it did, to our detriment. A couple of those photos there are just some of the examples of the issues we faced. The top photo is, we talked about it previously, is the steam system that provided services to our MDRD. Unfortunately, it was some 60 years old and was corroded and needed to be shut down. And we couldn't replace it because it's embedded in the walls like that. The bottom photo is unfortunately a patient at the OLEC campus identifying that that's the first winter. We moved in October, and he identified how cold the rooms were from the inside because of gaps in the walls that we have subsequently patched up and fixed. But that just shows you some of the issues we faced at the start. So how did we fix the problem? We didn't wallow in our despair and say, oh, this is horrible. We focused on our patients and our community. We focused on our future. So what we started immediately was looking at the way we operate and how we function as a large community teaching acute care hospital in the province of Ontario. Right now, we're approximately the 11th largest hospital, including academic centers in the province of Ontario, and we're the 3rd largest community teaching hospital in the province of Ontario. So as a result, we did some realigning of our own administrative staff, our medical advisory committee, our staffing models, and through various functional reviews or reviews that were completed, our peer performance, Windsor Regional, has been identified as being efficient from an overall operational efficiency perspective than most of our hospital peers. And that holds to today. So a lot of work was done. And how do we do that work? So what we focused on was a process that actually we started before we closed the transaction of taking responsibility for acute care, is we were already started into it by the time October 1st, 2013 happened. And we looked at a process, what we call standardization and optimization, and it continues through to today. What we do is we looked at every single program between the 2 campuses and standardized them so the experience from the patient's perspective was the same. We went to the highest common denominator. with respect to that experience. How did we do that? We brought the staff from both campuses working together. We brought in best practice from outside the organization or within the organization that was happening at either campus. And the most important part of that planning was we had patients at the table. So they were able to share their experiences with our team and with our staff to come up with the best way to provide their services. So not only did this result in we wanted to have the patient experience, no matter what campus they walked into, to be the same. We wanted staff who historically barely talk to each other because they're at two different campuses at two different organizations to work hand in hand together. And the third thing, we wanted to make sure our patients were involved because this is their hospital, this is their community, this is their process. And the fourth thing is we're looking at moving towards a new acute care hospital where we're all going to be in the same building. And that was our standardization and optimization process, which continues to today. At the same time, while we were dealing with our financial issues, we wanted to deal with how do we improve our patient flow and our processes through our facilities? And how do we focus on patient safety and patient quality? So one of the things we did, not a lot of press with respect to it, is we created the first Ontario Hospital Command Center, and that's the photo you see, where we have what's called a command center at each hospital campus. And with our software system, our simulation software, we can predict who's going to be coming into our campuses on a daily basis. We know exactly, are they going to be here for a medical reason, a surgical reason, trauma, stitches? We know how many. We know how many are going to be discharged on a daily basis. Pretty much we have information that we know about every single patient, and sometimes we even know their name when they're going to be coming in and being ready for them. So as a result, that went a long way to dealing with patient flow and took the mystery out of healthcare. Is you will talk to a lot of healthcare individuals and they'll say it's unpredictable, you don't know. Yes, we know. We know what's going to be coming through our doors and we can be ready for it. So we can see issues coming days in advance and we're far more proactive than being reactive. Then we created processes, what we call Monday morning huddles, where we review the previous week's performance with respect to safety issues. And we focus on issues like hospital-acquired infections, patient falls, and irreplaceable lab specimens. So we've been doing that back since April 2014. And what we look at is we examine that between the two campuses, and our goal is to get to zero. Because studies have shown that 8 to 10% of patients that come into any hospital, not just Windsor Regional, any hospital across the world, are not helped by hospitals, but harmed by hospitals. So how can you reduce that harm? What can you put into place to reduce that harm? And we have a motto that we can't manage data unless we measure that data. And as a result, we have to measure it and we have to look at it and examine what went right, what went wrong, what can we change? We do this on a daily basis. We do this on a weekly basis. We do this on a monthly, quarterly basis, on an annual basis. And you'll see from these charts with respect to patient harm, over time, since April 2014 to March 2020, both campuses not only are going down with respect to patient harm, but they're intersecting. So that shows the work we did with respect to SOP, standardization and optimization, is working, is we're reducing patient harm. We're getting that down to zero, and that's our eventual goal. At the same time, we looked at patient flow index. And before they started talking about words in the province like ending hallway medicine, that was our goal. We were already talking about that back before actually 2014. It just so happens this data is 2014, is how do we reduce the number of patients admitted who don't have a bed available? That's called hallway medicine, where they've been admitted from, say, the emergency department and they don't have a bed in the building because all the beds are taken. How can we reduce the number of alternative level of care patients? Those are patients that are in acute care that don't need acute care any further. Also, how can we continue to focus on an international number, which is trying to get patients discharged before 11 a.m.? What that means is You don't wait till 11 a.m. to get all the materials together. You talk about discharge well in advance. So by 11 a.m. of that morning, that patient is not only ready for discharge from the work you've done pretty much on the day they got admitted, but that everything's come together, that the whole team has been able to see the patient. And you'll see again from this data, how our ending hallway medicine has worked. And a couple things. Number one is we didn't do this alone. It took clearly our whole team at Windsor Regional Hospital, but it also took teams at Hotel de Grace Healthcare. It also took teams at Home and Community Services run by Kathy Kelly. It also took teams at Assisted Living. And I could go on and on with respect to how this had to be a community effort. And not only did this do wonders for us with respect to patient flow, but this got us in a very good position heading into this pandemic, where hospitals had census of say 120%. And for them to get down to a census of 50% to have the capacity to possibly handle a surge, some of them didn't get there. And lucky we didn't get the surge. But Windsor Regional, we were able to get there to the point that while we were moving through the pandemic, a lot of hospitals had to cancel cancer surgeries. We didn't. We were able to continue those cancer surgeries, and we were ready to cancel them if we needed to, if the surge started to show up. But because we entered the pandemic in a very good spot from a patient census point of view, that gave us a better opportunity to be better prepared. Where does this all bring us? Well, it brings us to the point that for the year ending March 31st, I am proud to announce from the hard work of the whole team, from the board of directors, to the VPs, to the professional staff, to the frontline workers, did an amazing job this particular year. And our year ending March 31st, 2020, we had announcing an operating surplus of $2.89 million and a hospital margin of $6.2 million. Now, that didn't come at the risk, as I stated, of quality and performance. In fact, in December 2019, we were accredited by Accreditation Canada with a very elite status, and that's called accreditation with exemplary standing. We didn't have much time to bathe in the success, I guess, of that because of the pandemic planning, but that again put us in a great position heading into the pandemic as an organization to say we're on the right track, we're doing the right things. And some of the things that the accreditation decision stated is they talked about this concept of zero harm. Again, our goal is to get both campuses down to zero. We don't want to harm any patients. So even if we harm one patient, meaning they get a hospital-acquired infection, which in a building with only 20% private rooms is an accomplishment to have zero. That means the staff have done an amazing job. Is difficult. And they noted that there were 3 weeks in 2019 where we had zero harm. Because even if one person's harmed, telling that person that, oh, we only had one this week. You know what, with all due respect, if I'm the one, I don't care. It's 100% to me. So it has to be zero, and that has to be our goal. And that's what we aim for. And I'm proud to announce last week, guess what? Zero harm, both campuses met no let during a pandemic. So you can't get better than that. For our staff and the work they do. Some of the other comments is our board. Our board, our physicians, they identified ethical decision-making, patient, family-centered. As stated, community partners, we can't do this alone. We need all of them. And they were interviewed and they were talked to. And, the general theme of collaboration and trust. CEO, don't worry about him, he's fine. The mission, outstanding care, no exceptions, cornerstone of everything we do. Governance structure, and again, you can't manage what you don't measure. Talked about our harm index that we follow and that I just highlighted. The entire senior team, open door policy, can't do it without them. Leaders are commended for their ability to demonstrate a presence at both campuses. Senior leaders participate in Scrub Thursdays. It's commendable, and they're on the floors working with the frontline staff. The organization's attention to focus on patient care through patient flow, patient experience. And then the work, what we call standard work, which we're actually implementing during the pandemic across all of our Erie St. Clair hospitals on how to create also standard work during the pandemic, which is amazing, and some very positive results. Some comments, patients and families stated. The accreditor said this first time she's ever heard at an accreditation where they commented on how delicious the food was. You know, the babies, you know, being born, nurses are amazing, and we all work together to keep people safe. Our staff team's the best. I've learned a lot since I've been here regarding my career. I was a nursing student here, and now I'm glad to be working here. So that's just a highlight of how we got to this point, how we got to this position of surplus. Our goal is to sustain it moving forward, and I'll talk about that a little more after I hand it off to Dr. Saad. So Dr. Saad, your turn. Probably got to unmute him, Dan.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. I wasn't able to unmute. Thank you, David. When I took over as Chief of Staff, one of the main mandates is to help with improving the quality of care in the organization. As David mentioned, a lot of work has to be done when you try to change a culture in an organization and when you're trying to work on quality. I created a 5-point plan that I presented to the board back in November, and it's hard to believe that it hasn't even been a year in this position, and of course the pandemic makes days feel like weeks and weeks feel like months. One of the mandates that I created was the recruitment and retention. What we did is we formed a new committee called the Recruitment and Retention Committee. It has representatives from every department in the hospital on it. We are vetting candidates now, so anyone who's applying to Windsor Regional Hospital will present before this committee and we'll have an interview. COVID sort of sidelined it for about a month, but then we quickly picked up right after that and have been having meetings through Zoom. We have interviewed several candidates from across specialties. We've successfully recruited some very high profile positions, including a vascular surgeon, which we've been looking for over 5 years, I would say, close to 10. Psychiatrists that are always in high demand have been recruited, including 2 that are going to be starting in the summer. We all know about the anesthesia shortage that we had recently as a result of sudden departures and retirements. And I'm happy to report again that as of today, we have given offers to 3 anesthesiologists that will be starting within the next 3 months. So the anticipated shortage for anesthesia that we expected to last anywhere from 12 to 18 months, it looks like within 6 months we've been able to successfully recruit. Emergency medicine, we're always recruiting. Neurologists have also been hard to come by. And we have 1 new grad who's from Boston who's going to be starting, and another one that we're recruiting from BC who's a stroke specialist to help grow our stroke program. And what the Recruitment and Retention Committee is doing is, again, looking at the human resources for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, and beyond, and trying to plan so that we don't run into shortages like we did recently with the anesthesia shortage that we had. We'll go to the next slide. The other main component is the professional staff engagement. I've always said after I took over as Chief of Staff that I felt like physicians and professional staff members had the sense that they were mercenaries, that they didn't really have a close tie or obligation to the hospital. They would come into the hospital, do their work, and then go to their office and really not care much about the hospital. It was always referred to as the hospital, their hospital, and I wanted to change the culture so that they took ownership in the hospital and started calling it our hospital. I sent out a series of surveys to the professional staff, asking them for feedback from our quarterly staff meetings and what they wanted to have in their communications. I started a monthly chief progress report to update people on the status of the basically state of the union of the professional staff as well as the hospital. It's been published monthly. It goes through the 5-point plan that I have to improve quality in the organization. And the next step is to start highlighting certain departments and subsections to see how they're doing with each of those 5 pillars. It was sidelined during COVID, but it was supplanted really with weekly updates for COVID and sometimes daily updates for everything that's been changing so quickly with COVID. We're doing what we can to also recognize the success of our professional staff in a bit more robust ways. We've had a lot of research, and I'll talk a bit about that in the next couple of slides, that's been going on in the organization, but not really centralized and not really recognized. We've updated the rules and regulations in terms of the expectations for the professional staff, and I'm in the process now of reviewing the bylaws. And I can tell you that I did get a sense of strong engagement from the professional staff, especially during COVID. I can tell you during this pandemic, when we've had to make very quick decisions on the fly, professional staff members have signed up in droves. You know, David and I would talk, when are we going to start the assessment center? And of course, you know, things happen. And David's like, okay, let's get it up and running tomorrow. That's usually the timeline David gives people. So then great, I send out a notice to the professional staff, and I can tell you we had volunteers lining up. We were able to staff it immediately. Most recently, when we had to extend the hours to 9 p.m., again, we had about 48 hours notice to do that. And we had an entire schedule filled for a month. With the field hospital, same thing. The field hospital was up and running within 7 days, and we had full physician coverage with 2 doctors ready to go and an entire month of call covered. So I couldn't be more proud of the professional staff, particularly during this stressful time, in terms of their engagement, their ownership of patients, and their buy-in into the hospital and what we're doing. The next slide will talk about the morbidity and mortality framework. I did mention in the past we're not doing a lot of quality reviews. In fact, almost no departments were doing morbidity mortality reviews. We created a new committee called the Medical Quality Assurance Committee. M&M rounds are now done at the department level, as well as at the MQA level if it's involving multiple departments. I recently presented a plan to the executive committee to recruit a dedicated chief quality lead. This is somebody who will take an active role in managing the morbidity mortality rounds at the individual department level, but also bring that up to the MQA, which reports to the MAC and then ultimately to the board. With this new committee framework, when you start running a lot of M&M rounds, you start to pick up trends of things that are happening in the organization. And as a result of this, I think we're going to be able to identify some corporate quality initiatives and projects that will then lead to further improvement in the quality of care that's being recognized. So we have engaged with an external search firm. That CQL search is underway, and I will keep the board updated as we move along with that. Performance and leadership management was the 4th main point that I wanted to bring to not just our medical leaders, but also the entire professional staff. We've had engagements with MedFall with a 360 program that they have for personalized reviews. I personally have met with all of the department chiefs. I've outlined their goals and expectations for the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I've reviewed all of their contracts. The next step is to start doing these performance evaluations to make them a bit more robust for our leaders. And then the next step would be naturally to roll out some of these evaluations for all of the professional staff. You know, doctors will work here for years and not know really how they're doing because there's no formal way of feeding back what's happening. Most of the time they only hear about a negative outcome or an adverse event. But what we really want to do is to try to raise the level and have a more objective way of identifying where some of the deficiencies are and how they can build that up through continuing medical education. For our professional staff, leadership, we have allowances for all of them. And in the past, they were able to use them for whatever they wanted, and most of it was clinical work. But what we've done is try to focus it now on leadership development. So again, if there's an area of leadership that they feel like they need more help in, or it's been identified by me or during their reviews, then they can focus that CME to allow them to build up that leadership portfolio. And the final and fifth point was academic and research vision. This one, I think, is going to be a game changer for us. We know that all organizations that have robust academic and research visions have higher quality of care. There's no question. And that's what this all boils down to. We're trying to do the best that we can for our patients. We formed a new committee called the Academic and Research Committee. I engaged with Dr. Ham, who many of you know, and she's well known locally and even internationally with research projects in cancer, with Carmenos across the river, as well as with our own cancer center. And she was ecstatic to take on the role. So I'm very happy that she's taken on this leadership position. The Academic and Research Committee will report to the MAC. And again, the board will end up hearing all about it through my reports. I went to the executive committee, and now we're going to be looking for board support to create a dedicated office of academic and research that will be tied in with medical affairs. And the main reason is to centralize all of the research that's happening in the organization, and that includes the Cancer Center. We need to be aware of what we have going on in our hospital, how we're going to build up research. We already have very strong links with both the University of Windsor and Schulich School of Medicine with Western. And this really came to the forefront fairly quickly. You would think that sometimes academic and research visions would be sidelined during a pandemic, but if anything, this has brought it to the forefront. We have been engaged and asked to participate in COVID-19 trials. We will have 5 COVID trials by the end of this week. One of them is a point of care swab test that will take less than an hour to give you a result of whether you're positive or negative. And I'm sure you've all been hearing about testing and how important testing is, both for tracing purposes, but also to contain a pandemic. And one of the most exciting ones is another one you've probably heard of in the media, is the convalescent serum trial, which takes serum from patients who've recovered from COVID in an attempt to use those antibodies and then give it to a COVID patient to see if those antibodies can neutralize the infection. And I'm happy to report that as of today, we've recruited our first patient to participate in the convalescent serum trial. And of course, all of this work requires operational support, which is again why I've received nothing but support from the executive committee, from senior leadership, from this board. I think we're all on the same page. My future state, and I think everybody's, is to try to get to be an academic health sciences center. And we meet a lot of the criteria. The only thing we're really deficient in is that academic and research vision. And we want to try to build that up, because ultimately, not only will it put us on the map from an academic and research perspective, because there are many things that are unique to our area that we can expand on in terms of research, but also it's going to improve the quality of care for all patients that come through our hospital. Thank you, David.
Okay. Continue, David. There it is.
So what's next is our hospital board has approved an interim operating budget of with a planned hospital margin of $2.1 million for this current fiscal year. Needless to say, the impact of COVID on the hospital budget and the level of ministry support will still have a massive impact on any hospital's budget, on any budget for that matter, in the province of Ontario, Canada, as we move forward. But we're, of course, through the ministry, Ontario Health Support is keeping track of the various expenses and have been regularly providing that information. And I think there's a date sometime in June we have to provide an up-to-date information on expenses. Also, one of the issues is we were originally scheduled to go live date of a new hospital information system. Due to COVID-19, that's been delayed. We are hoping for sometime in early 2021, depending on how we move through COVID, possible second waves, et cetera, to be in a position to move forward with respect to that system. Also, we need to work on our working capital as identified before. We have a plan to move forward with respect to that. And of course, we have to continue, and we do continue to invest in capital equipment in our existing facilities, even before we move to a new facility. Taking into account anything we purchase right now has a vision of possibly having to be moved to a new facility and having that on our radar screen. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is the now, with respect to our frontline staff and with respect to how they have responded to COVID-19 and the pandemic, and also our community. Our community right now, in large part, a lot of individuals are suffering. They're out of work. They've been out of work for a considerable amount of time. What the future looks like is not that clear for many of them. But even in the face of this, they rallied around our staff and supported our staff and really came to help them get through this themselves. And approximately 3 months ago, in preparing this slide deck, the individual said, you need to put this part of your a town hall you did as part of the slide deck. So I put it in. And it's going on 3 months now. We had a town hall, and it was a couple days after the WHO announced the pandemic of COVID-19. And our staff was nervous. Our staff was anxious. Our staff was concerned of what was coming. There was, of course, a ton of rumors, a ton of speculation. And we did a ton of planning to get to this point. And we rallied around each other. And I'm going to play a portion of the town hall and then highlight some videos on how, or sorry, some photos of how our staff reacted to all of this and how the support of Windsor, Essex rallied our staff to be there for those impacted by COVID throughout this process. We're at a moment right now where us as healthcare individuals here at Met and Olette, this is it, folks. This is where our community relies upon us. You set the example. You are here in healthcare for this very reason, to help people, to care for people. This is our moment to set an example of giving correct information as well as not creating unneeded panic. People rely upon you. And I'll give you an example. Dr. Saad stated he was in church the other day, a couple weeks ago, and it was communion time, and a couple days later he found out people were standing behind him, sitting behind him. And they said they were going to take the lead from him whether to go up for communion or not. Folks, people know who you are. I don't care what classification you are in this organization. They know where you work. So it's time for us to individually and collectively lead, not create unneeded panic. And I know it's stressful, and I know we all have our individual anxieties and our concerns. And that's where you lean on each other to share those concerns and deal with those anxieties. But when it comes to the public, it's time to step up. Anyone who's been in healthcare, this is not a surprise. In SARS, I couldn't have given this speech because it was kind of all new to everybody. But ever since SARS, basically 20 years ago, if you got into healthcare, you've been in healthcare, we've been planning. We've been having tabletops, we've been having drills, we've been having all sorts of education, all sorts of training for this very moment to lead for our community. And now's the time we do that. And I expect that from all of you. And I know you can do it. So again, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna get on the other end of this. But in the meantime, stick together. We're gonna get through it and stick together for our community and the ones you love. So what you're going to see outside of the campuses at Windsor Regional Hospital are these banners. They're going to be going up in the next couple of months. And it's to celebrate our staff and also thank the Windsor Essex community for all of their support and all of their support they've given us throughout these difficult times. And you will notice this Together We Stay Strong. This is an emblem that is made up of the colors of the Windsor Essex hospitals. And it's an emblem that all of us wear proudly on our scrubs and on our outfits, that the way we get through this is together as a community and together as a hospital system, as a healthcare system. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the report of Dr. Saad and myself.
Okay. Thank you, David, and thank you, Dr. Saad. Does the board members have any comments or questions regarding that rather comprehensive presentation? Okay, I see Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, David and Dr. Saad, thank you for the presentation. Kudos to you and your teams. It really is a team effort, so thank you. I think every board member would like to raise their hand and say that, but thank you for everything that you guys have done the last 3 months and actually the last 6 years, getting us to this point and having us ready for this pandemic and kind of leading through a transition. So got to thank Dr. Gary there as well. He did a lot of that heavy lifting. Just a quick question for Dr. Saad. The MQA and the M&M, are we behind the times in having those up and running? And are these best practices?
Just a second.
Thank you
Okay.
for unmuting me. Yeah. Anthony, that's a good question. And I would have to say that, yes, we were behind the times when it comes to having a robust morbidity and mortality round. I think all high functioning organizations have a very good framework for addressing quality and how they look at medical errors that happen in an organization. The objective of a well-run M&M round or conference is to, identify adverse outcomes associated with medical error, modify the behavior and judgment based on previous experiences, and then to try to prevent that error from happening again in the future. And we really did not have that framework before it was recently set up, which again is unfortunate, but it goes back to what I said about feedback for even clinicians and physicians. We had medical doctors who think they're doing well and they go about their business, but there's no real good feedback for how it was being done. Now, having said that, we did have very robust QSIPAs, but a lot of times the QSIPA will address a particular part of the care of a patient. So that was, I think, going above and beyond. But what was missing, I think, was a bit of the feedback back to the medical professionals to say, well, was there an error in judgment? Was there an error how you were thinking? Was there a cognitive bias, we call them, and that made you make the mistake that you did? And how do you work on it and how do you build on it? So again, from a corporate perspective, I think we were doing a great job with QSIPAs. I don't think we were doing as robust a job with our professional staff to help them improve on their cognitive biases and how to improve quality.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saad.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Sure, go ahead, Anthony.
Dr. Saad, are there any other committees that you're working on currently where we are missing them as best practices?
No, I think I tied up those loose ends. So we have the M&M, so what's called the MQA now, where I'm still looking for a chair. So we're recruiting externally for a chief quality lead. We have a recruitment and retention committee that I've been chairing, but again, I'm looking for a chair there. Utilization and management, and then academic and research, who Caroline Ham has taken over. So those are all subcommittees of the MAC that are going to be reporting out on a monthly basis. And then ultimately the board will receive those reports again through my MAC report.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from board members? If so, raise your hand. I don't see any, therefore we will move to the next item on the agenda, and we will hear from Dr. Larry Jacobs. Let me just unmute you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as many of you are aware, we made a decision back in March to pause clinical learning for medical students because of the uncertainty around the pandemic and all of the supplies and physician resources that were going to be necessary at that time. The good news is that we are ready to come back. So July 6th is the official go date for clinical learning back at all hospital sites across the region and in the Schulich umbrella. That date mostly has been adopted by most of the Ontario medical schools as well. I believe Kingston, Queen's University at Kingston is the only one that's come back sooner. That's due to some very different data that they have with respect to the pandemic. Certainly from the perspective of our physician community here, we couldn't do that without the willingness of all of our preceptors and also the willingness and the work of the hospital and making sure that our students would be safe with things like personal protective equipment and all of that, and all of the sort of things that would be necessary to make sure that learning would still be safe, but also rich. And so we are very excited that we're able to move that forward. So from that perspective, I am very grateful personally. University education will be very different across the province starting in September. We've heard that the University of Windsor's plan for September is to be a online curriculum. Western University has adopted a more of a hybrid curriculum, certainly decreasing the amount of students on campus, but still having some students on campus. From the Windsor campus perspective, that does put us in a little bit of a different position. Certainly with our medical school being housed at the University of Windsor, we are trying to work between the administrative expectations of both institutions. The good news about that is the University of Windsor has definitely been gracious enough to allow us to run what is necessary to make sure that medical education can continue in September. Much of our curriculum is going to transition to a virtual platform, but there's a lot of what we do that needs to be done face-to-face. I can't teach medical students how to examine a patient over a screen. So those types of things, we have to put in all of those, the safeguards to do it safely, but we're hoping to keep that going in September. So medical education will be in what we're calling a hybrid model starting in September, at least for the beginning of that academic year. The final thing I wanted to comment on was for postgraduate medical education. So in July, we'll be bringing in a new group of residents for both family medicine and psychiatry. Despite everything that's been happening, there should be no delays in those starts. So they've all would have been able to complete their board exams online for many of them and begin their orientation process to begin on July the 1st. So that's the end of my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. Board members, does anybody have any comments or questions for Dr. Jacobs regarding his report out? Yes, John. Just a second. Go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
Did I have my hand up?
You had your hand up.
Oh, I got to unhand my hand. Hang on.
Okay.
I don't have any questions, and I don't know what I did. Hang on.
That's okay. Did you have a question, John?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we're now going to move to the financial portion of the agenda. And with that, I'll turn it over to our board treasurer, Michael Lavoie. And let me just find your name here. We'll unmute you, Mike.
Very good.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask the directors to turn to tab C in their package. I'll go through the financial presentation. And the first slide in the deck refers to the payroll results, which we've been following diligently throughout the year, because as we all know by now, the payroll accounts for 57% of our total expenditures. And as it worked out, we began to properly, or I should say appropriately, staff as the census changed within the hospital. So that helped us build a bit of surplus on that line item. The next slide, we talk about patient volume days, and what becomes quickly obvious is a huge reduction in the month of March. Actually, we were 2,874 patient days below where we expected to be. And this is the result of the elective services being discontinued in regards to COVID-19. The next slide is the financial operations for March 31st. And just quickly go through, total revenue is $532,772,000. Offset that with a whole list of expenses. And we'll notice the first one being the employee salary and wages. I've already mentioned 1.8 million reduction from what we had planned. And of course, the employee benefits follow that reduction in salary costs. The total expenses, 528,859,000. And the number showing here, surplus from hospital operations, 4,485,000, and that's before the building amortization. So once you factor in the building amortization, as David mentioned earlier, $2,839,000 surplus. The next slide, we'll talk about year-to-date revenue, and you'll see as I go through here a number of areas where COVID-19 pressures have come to play, or there's been a suspension of elective services, and even the revenue side, unfavorable in the month of March, $1,342,000, again, due to the reduction of services. The next slide, continuing expenses. We've already talked about salary and wages and the benefits that went with that. Net patient service revenue and medical staff. Again, that was favorable, and unfavorable in March due to service reductions was the net revenue and expense of $961,000. March, there was some additional spending in specialty areas like cardiac cath labs. Again, in preparation, they needed the supplies to be in stock, as well as medical and surgical supplies. Again, some additional expenses in March. The next slide, we have notable insurance over budget due to increased premiums, and utilities are favorable at the year end, and that certainly helped with our bottom line. The next slide, we talk about rental and lease equipment being unfavorable, and bed rentals in preparation for COVID-19 is included in there. So there was a number of areas in the final numbers for our fiscal 2019-20 that were impacted by COVID-19 in the month of March. The next slide basically We're within target on acute length of stay in both campuses. The psych average length of stay was within target at MET and slightly above target at OLET. And the last, I guess, second to last slide, we talk about patient volumes. We're looking at, when we compare to previous March, a reduction in virtually every area when we compare to the previous year. Again, impacted as we had to pull back on various services. Acute patient days fell dramatically, as you can see from that particular slide. And the final slide, the organizational health, listing our sick time, overtime comparing to target for both campuses. And again, these results are virtually the same as in the previous month. Mr. Chair, I'd be open to questions at this time.
Thank you, Michael. Board members have any questions for Michael's presentation? If so, please indicate by raising your hand using the icon. I don't see any hands, therefore, Michael, I would suggest you move to the next item on the agenda.
Alrighty, thank you very much. I will, at this point, ask directors to move to tab E. There's a couple motions that need to come forward. And the first motion coming from the Finance, Audit and Resources Committee recommends that the draft audited financial statements of Windsor Regional Hospital for the 2019-2020 fiscal year be approved. And I would so move that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and that is seconded by Penny. And are there comments or questions from the board members regarding the audited financial statements, which you've had a chance to review through? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay, is there anyone opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you, Michael. Next.
The next motion, the Finance, Audit and Resources Committee recommends that the Board of Directors approve the appointment of KPMG as auditors for Windsor Regional Hospital for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. I would move that, Mr. Chair.
Is there someone that will second that? Okay, Anthony, are there comments or questions regarding that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by raising your hands. Okay, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is also carried. Thank you, Michael. Next.
The next item would be tab D, and it's the minutes of the Finance, Audit and Resources meeting for May 25th. And I would move acceptance of those minutes.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Someone want to second that? Paul, are there any comments or questions or necessary revisions to those minutes? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hands. Is there anyone opposed? No. So that is carried. Thank you, Michael. As that completes your report?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We had nothing on the consent agenda for this meeting. The date of our next meeting is September the 3rd. At the moment, we're planning that meeting will be via Zoom, much like this one. The time hasn't been set yet, so we'll see as we get closer to the September date. This concludes our agenda. I need a motion for adjournment. Okay, let's see, Patty and Penny. All those in favor? I'm assuming everyone is. Okay, that's carried. This concludes our Zoom meeting tonight and our YouTube live feed. I thank you all for joining us and have a good evening. Thank you.